What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. I'll be going game by game in this one, breaking down each backfield, going over the running backs I'd start and avoid. Week 1 actually wasn't too crazy. I thought that it would be like a lot of things were getting wrong. It was actually fairly predictable for the most part. We saw a lot of rookies command a bigger workload right out of the gates than a lot of people did expect. We're going to go over everything from week 1 and what we should expect in week 2. But first, of course, have to do the stat of the day. Today's stat: among running backs in week 1 with at least 10 carries, Aaron Jones faced the highest percentage of 8+ defenders in the box, who faced 8+ defenders at the second highest rate. Okay, let's go game by game. Also, I'm going to mention the spreads and the totals for these ones because it is important, looking at, this team is favored by a touchdown at home in a high total game. You're going to really want the running backs in that scenario, not the running backs, underdogs by 15 points in a 40 total game on the road. That's obviously the extreme, but that's why it's very, very helpful. But if you're watching this on Thursday, the lines I put out are the opening lines. So whatever they came out with on like Sunday night into Monday morning, those are the lines I'm using. Yes, some of them are going to change because actually some of them are pretty bad this week. But that's just for you to know. If you see something that's different, listen, lines change all the time. So the first game we're going to go over is the Thursday night matchup between the Bengals and the Browns. The Browns are 6-point home favorites, and total is set at 45.5. So a pretty average total, should be like a normal scoring game. And again, Browns 6-point home favorites. Both of these offenses looked just dreadful in week 1. Honestly, they looked so bad. But they were both also facing very solid defenses. The Browns predictably struggled against the Ravens, and then Burrow struggled in his first start against the Chargers. Both teams will get much weaker matchups this time around, though. So on the Bengals side, we see Mixon finish week 1, 19 carries for 69 yards, and then he caught just 1 of 2 targets for 2 yards. The big takeaway here is that the split is what we expected. He handled 95% of the running back carries and was just the clear lead back. The issue is the targets. He needs to see more than 2 targets if he's going to be a weekly running back 1. I don't think we should overreact to week 1. 2 of Bernard's 5 total touches came on the last drive of the game. And this was, probably one of the worst games the Bengals are going to play all season. But we are going to need to monitor his targets going forward, because if he's staying at like 2, 3, 4 targets a week, that's concerning. And it's definitely going to limit his upside. On the Browns side, everything we talked about this summer basically happened. I mean, we said Chubb was going to be efficient on the ground. He's going to have a high touchdown ceiling because there will be weeks where this offense scores, more than a handful of points like they did this week. But the receptions are not going to be there while Hunt is healthy. And so we loved Hunt because we're like, well, he's going to get some early down work. He's going to get more total work than last season, but also a ton of targets. We talked about how Hunt outscored Chubb in 6 out of 8 weeks last season once he returned in full PPR. What do we see this week? Chubb gets 10 carries and only 1 target, and then Hunt sees 13 carries and 6 targets. Now, neither did all that great. I guess Hunt had like a solid game, but he only turned those 6 targets into like a few yards. Like, it was pretty bad how he was on a per target basis. But remember, this was against the Ravens. This was a very difficult matchup. It was by far like the worst game script Chubb could possibly have. When you're losing by 25 points at times, like, that's just not the game script that Chubb is going to excel in. He excels when they're at least somewhat close, but definitely when they're winning, kind of like Derrick Henry in that sense. So this was basically a worst case scenario game for Chubb, and I guess he still had some points, right? Like, it wasn't a complete dud. But again, Chubb is going to have a much lower floor than you're traditionally going to get with running back 1s. The game script definitely favored Hunt, and so it's not shocking that he outscored him. But again, it's not like either of these guys went off. As for this week, they are 6-point favorites, like I said, and the Bengals defense did just allow the Chargers to gain 155 rushing yards. Because of that, I think you do need to be starting Chubb for sure. And I think that Hunt is also flex viable, especially in PPR leagues. I think if you're in a PPR league, you can feel good this week putting Hunt in the flex because we know the Browns are going to score much more points than they did this last week. So touchdown should be there. And then we do believe the reception is going to continue to be there with Hunt. And then with Chubb, of course, game script, he's going to have more than 10 carries if they're winning. Next game, 49ers at Jets. And the 49ers opened as only 6.5 point favorites. I think that is a little bit low. I think they should probably finish around 7.5 or 8 points. And then this game has a 43.5 point total, which, isn't super low, but it does not indicate that it's going to be a high scoring affair. I think the 49ers just absolutely dominate this game, but I guess we'll see. So the Jets just got roasted over the first half last week. But even with that, so even with the Bills having a very, very positive game script for the running backs are only able to get 2.3 yards per carry. This is still definitely a plus matchup for the 49ers running backs, given, the projected game script. If you're going to be ahead by a touchdown on average and you're going to be the team that's scoring into the 20s, well, that's a good sign for your running game. And since this is a run-first team in general anyways, it's a positive game for the 49ers running back, even if it's not from an efficiency standpoint. It should be from a total volume standpoint. For me, the only playable running back, though, is Raheem Mostert. But you need to also remember that he had a really nice game this week, but he's not going to get a ton of touches. And you got to remember that besides his 76-yard receiving touchdown, he only had 9 half PPR points. So, yes, he went off this week, but most of that production came from that one long play. Didn't do too much aside from that. And again, even if he's getting 15 to 17 touches, this is a difficult defense to put up points against as a running back. So I think you're probably starting Raheem Mostert this week, but don't expect, a 75-yard receiving touchdown every week. That's probably the only one he's going to have from that distance this season. But he is the only running back I would start on the 49ers, and I do think if you own him, he's probably a solid guy to play in the flex because of the game script. On the Jets side, I don't really think you can start anyone. I mean, Gore will never see enough of a workload to be fully trusted. Bell tweaked his hamstring, and even if he plays this week, I'm not going to trust him, right? Like, as a huge underdog, you're not projected to score many points, a really tough 49ers run defense. Like, I'm not starting Bell. I know that, almost none of you own him. I bet you everyone watching this video, if you watched any of our videos, you don't have Le'Veon Bell on your team. But if you do own him, he's just not going to be the feature back this season, and he's going to be inefficient. This is a brutal matchup, like I said, and he just tweaked his hamstring. So even if he plays, I don't trust him. And again, if he doesn't play, I don't trust any of the remaining running backs to really fill that workload enough to trust them either. Next up, we've got the Bills at the Dolphins. This one opened as just a 4-point difference. So the Bills only 4-point road favorites. I believe it's going to be bet up closer to maybe around 6. I think that's where I would put the line at. It's probably around 6. And the game is a very low 41.5 point total. So I just honestly think the Bills kind of crushing this one as well. I don't believe the Dolphins are going to do that much on offense to keep up. And I really do think this Bills offense is legit. Our boy Zach Moss got more work than most people expected. Not us, but what most people expected. He and Singletary split the early down work while Singletary out-targeted him. Singletary wasn't that great on a per-target basis. I would say neither of them were. They both had, if I have to remember, around 3.5 to 4 yards per target. Of course, it was Moss that converted the touchdown, but let's be honest, you can't just look at that because if Singletary was on the field, we don't know if he could have converted it as well. So neither of them were that great in the receiving game, but it is interesting to note that they did combine for 8 targets. So we were a little bit concerned maybe Josh Allen as a mobile quarterback doesn't dink and dump to running backs that much. Getting 8 targets combined for the both of them gives them somewhat of a floor. And it is nice that we saw what we expected. They bring in Moss when they were near the goal line. He converts the touchdown. If both of these are going to see around 10 to 12 touches a week, then it's going to be tough determining who to start, right? Because if you have a running back getting 10 touches with 3 of them in the receiving game, on average, you're not actually scoring that many points unless you score a touchdown. So it's really going to be touchdown or bust for either of these two. unless one of them starts to take over 60-70% of the workload, which I do think the most likely back to do that is Zach Moss. For this matchup, though, it's such a good one against the Dolphins defense that they're probably going to be able to just steamroll. I think that either of them can be used in the flex, but I don't think you need to force it. So if you've got one of these backs and you're like, I don't have that many other matchups I love. I mean, this is the Dolphins, right? Like, this is probably the highest touchdown upside that they're going to have. Not the highest for the total game. Again, it's only 41-point total. But I think of those 41 points, the Bills are going to make up a lot of it. Wouldn't be shocked if they get into the 30s in this one. And so given that sort of touchdown upside, I think both are flex viable. But again, I'm okay benching them because they're only going to get like 10 to 12 touches each. On the Dolphins side, don't really think you can start anyone. Howard's the clear lead back, but he was dreadful. And so we saw other running backs kind of filter in because he just wasn't doing anything. I think on average, he's going to be the guy in this offense on the ground, but he's not going to do anything in the receiving game. You've got Breida doing almost nothing as well. You've got Myles Gaskins coming in. Like, it was just a complete joke. Such a terrible offensive line, not a good offense in general, just not a team you want a running back on. So even if you somehow own them, just drop them. Giants at Bears is next. The Bears are 5.5-point favorites, and this game has a 43-point total. As for the Giants, I record this prior to the Monday night games, obviously, because this goes up Tuesday morning, so I have to make the video. So I don't know if Barkley suffered some major injury. I'm praying that that does not happen, but assuming he's fine, he's a must start every week. We don't need to go over that. For the Bears side, they looked an awful lot like last year. Let me tell you that. They did not look good. Trubisky did have an okay game, but that was very predictable. He historically has performed well against the Lions. They are not a good defense. They play like strictly man coverage. And so it is very simple for him to just diagnose what the defense is doing and play off of that. Against any sort of defense that is competent, basically, he's not going to perform as well. And given that he played well this week and it still wasn't that great for his weapons, I am concerned about this Bears offense. I thought that he would look better, but hopefully, I guess hopefully not that they play bad, but hopefully when he plays much worse over these next few weeks, they quickly bring Foles in because Trubisky is not the answer. Montgomery did gain 64 yards on 13 carries while bringing in 1 of 3 receptions for 10 yards. And then Cohen carried the ball 7 times for 41 yards, catching both of his targets for 6 yards. So both running backs not very involved in the receiving game. Both were fine on the ground, honestly, but just not enough total volume to really love them. Luckily, this is another good matchup for them. The Giants are not a good defense. This game has a relatively okay total. I mean, I guess for the Bears side, given that they are the favorites, it's a low total in general, but if you're the favorites, your implied total on your side is a bit higher. Cohen is probably only viable in full PPR leagues. Wouldn't love going there in a half PPR league, and even then, in full PPR, I still probably only want him in the flex. Montgomery is a fine flex play in general under all formats, but he's really going to need a touchdown to truly pay off. But it is nice knowing that he is at least the most likely of the running backs to score a touchdown. Next up, matchup between the Falcons and the Cowboys. This should be a really, really nice game this week. The Cowboys are 6-point home favorites, which feels a little aggressive. And the game has a 51.5-point total. We can save some time on this one, honestly, because Zeke's a must start every week. Gurley, he only played 45.5% of the team's snaps. But he is someone that when they're in these high total games, again, over a 50-point total, he is very likely to score a touchdown. And so he is someone that you would kind of want to play in the flex. He's only going to get, those 12 to 15 touches, but he's going to have the touchdown upside. And given that he plays running back, which is a position that isn't exceptionally deep, I do think you can play him. Just realize that he doesn't have the ceiling that we known before. And that's why we didn't love him this season, because he's not going to have 25 touches in games. So even in these games where they're in shootouts and they're winning, it's like if he's only getting 45% of the workload, he needs the touchdowns. And so I will play him this week if I owned him, which I don't. But if you own him, I think you do got to play him. I just realized the touchdown upside is really the only thing keeping him viable. Next up, classic matchup between the Lions and the Packers. The Packers are 6-point home favorites, and the total is a decently high 48 points. For the Packers, Aaron Jones is a must start, but he was only given 50% of the team's total carries, and while he did have a decent target share, he only gained 10 receiving yards. And he's exactly what he was last season. Now, last season, he crushed. And so in this role, he can be very, very viable. I think it was, the running back 2 in most formats last season? It's the touchdowns. If he scores the touchdowns, his role is awesome. And given that this offense is really good, he could score a lot of touchdowns. But he has an incredibly low floor when he doesn't score. And it's also a little bit concerning that his carry ceiling really isn't that high, because we know their plans this season are to bring A.J. Dillon on very, very slowly. They're not going to give him much work to start the season, midway through the season. To end the season, they're hoping to get him more and more involved. So given that, Jones only had 50% of the workload when they're only giving Dillon 2 carries, it's a little bit concerning for his volume in week 6, week 7, week 8, and in the fantasy playoffs. If they're going to give Dillon 5, 6, 7 carries down the stretch, and they're still going to involve Jamal Williams as well, we could see Aaron Jones scale back to more 10 or 12 carries each week, which would be very concerning. I don't think that's the right play. I think they should be featuring him, but it doesn't look like they're going to. And so I'm a little bit concerned. If he goes off this week, I would not be against trading high on him. I just don't think right now is his peak. I think he'll peak in value in a few more weeks. As for the Lions, we have a mess, honestly. Peterson had 14 carries, Kerryon Johnson had 7, and DeAndre Swift only had 3. While the targets were split 3 for Peterson, 0 for Kerryon Johnson, and then 5 for Swift, including the game-losing touchdown drop. Kerryon Johnson, honestly, is fine to drop. I don't think any of you own him. We tanked him in the rankings, but this team just hates him. They're bringing in Adrian Peterson and giving him a workload. It is going to be Swift and Peterson. I don't think you could possibly trust Kerryon Johnson unless they see mass injuries. Peterson might look viable on the surface, but he was in on less than 31% of the snaps, and that's going to go down as Swift gets more healthy, recovering from his injury, and just having more time to develop, right? Because it's not like he's hurt right now. It's that he was hurt for a lot of camp, and so he just didn't have enough time to get acclimated and to get fully ready for this offense. But as he does, they're going to use him more and more, and so that's going to hurt Peterson. So I really don't think Peterson is, he's someone you got to go out and add, but I don't think you're spending a lot of your fab on him. I don't think you're trying to get him aggressively, because look down the stretch, you'd need a Swift injury for him to be a consistent fantasy starter, and I think a lot of people are going to spend a lot of their budget on him, and I don't think that's smart. In my eyes, Swift is the clear back to own. He is clearly going to be a featured weapon in the passing game. He is going to have touchdown upside. He almost had 2 touchdowns this week, and he should have if he didn't have the drop. As for this coming week, I do think Peterson is flex viable if they're going to keep using him that much, but it's flex viable. You could use him in the flex. I would still prefer not to. As for Swift, I'd wait and see. I know that you probably drafted him in a spot where you'd like to be using him right now, but I want to see his workload go up a little bit more before I'm willing to use him. The targets were great, but the 3 carries were not great. And so I want him to get closer to 7 or 8 carries with that same involvement in the receiving game. Then I'd be okay starting him, just not yet. Next up, we've got the Jaguars at the Titans. The Titans are massive, 10.5-point home favorites. That's a truly terrible line, something you should be hammering. I posted on Twitter Monday. Hopefully the line stays the same and you guys can put in some bets on that this week. But I put a ton of money on Jaguars plus 10.5 because that's awful. 10.5 points for the Jaguars, that's ridiculous. But anyways, the Titans are massive favorites, and it is a fairly low total, 42.5. Again, I record these prior to the Monday night game, so if Henry just died on Monday night, I don't know about it right now, but this is a smash spot for him, and you're obviously starting him if he's healthy. As for the Jaguars, James Robinson operated as the clear lead back, and though he has a limited reception ceiling, a limited touchdown ceiling, and limitations on the offense in general, just not moving the ball a ton. It's not a horrible offense, but, this isn't the Chiefs. Given those limitations, I think he's a fine player to start in the flex. But I own him in my 14-team full PPR league that has 2 flex spots, And like, I still might not start him. So like, he's fine and he's going to get volume, but he's not just a slam dunk flex play. Think he's viable, not a slam dunk. But again, he's the lead back of an offense, and I don't expect that to change moving forward, at least until we see Armstead, we see a Zigbo come off the IR, but they won't be for these coming weeks. And so I think he's a fine guy to play in your flex. But also remember, they are projected to lose by like 10.5 points. Not good for running backs, especially in a low total game. Remember, we talked about at the beginning of the video. Vikings at Colts is next, and the Colts are surprisingly 3-point home favorites. Really thought the Vikings would be favored in this one. The total set at 47.5, so relatively high. On the Vikings side, always start Dalvin Cook. Also, while Madison looked really, really good this week, he's not going to see enough volume to be a reliable starter while Cook is healthy. But he did prove that he is the clear handcuff to own. He is clearly going to have running back one upside. He's going to be a weekly running back one if Cook goes down, and he is an epic player to stash. Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, Chase Edmonds. If you want 3 running backs that need to be owned in all leagues, but that are amazing upside stashes, those 3. And I guess you could throw Joshua Kelly in there as well, but I'll say his upside is a lot lower than the 3 I mentioned right there. But those are the 3 backs. You got to be owning them in a lot of leagues because they can win you their league if the starter goes down. As for the Colts, we do see the starter go down. We see Marlon Mack will miss the rest of the season with a torn Achilles. That makes Jonathan Taylor a borderline top 7 running back each week. He is going to absolutely dominate every single week. You are playing Jonathan Taylor. I do not care what the matchup is. Start him every single week. As for Hines, he could honestly be this year's Austin Eckler. I'd for sure be starting him in full PPR leagues moving forward. But I think he is viable even in half PPR leagues as like a running back 2 or a flex. Even though this is a tough matchup, honestly, I would be fine starting him. We see that Phillip Rivers is just worth so much to running backs. Look at Austin Eckler. The man had 1 target this week. We all know Eckler is a great receiving back, but Phillip Rivers is such a benefit to your running backs. I mean, Taylor, Hines, and Mack had 17 targets in week 1. 17 targets for those running backs, and Mack was out for a portion of the game. The upside in the receiving game for Hines and for Taylor is insane moving forward because of who they have at quarterback. And so even in the weeks where they have tough running matchups, if Taylor's going to have 5 or 6 targets as I don't want to say a floor, but he's going to hover around 5 or 6 targets a lot of weeks. Just that alone is going to give him a ton of upside no matter what he does on the ground. And remember, this is a fantastic offensive line. He's going to crush on the ground as well. So always start Jonathan Taylor. I think Hines can be a weekly running back 2 to a flex who you prefer in a full PPR league. Rams at Eagles is the next game. Eagles are 2.5-point home favorites, and this game has a fairly average 46-point total. The Rams side is a very tough one to decipher. We know that the Eagles are historically a pass funnel, while Haskins couldn't exploit that in week 1. They did hold Washington to 2.2 yards per carry. So we just know what the Eagles are. You don't want to run on the Eagles. If you want to beat the Eagles, you got to do it through the air. They're going to stop you on the ground. So this is a negative matchup for running backs. The biggest problem isn't even the matchup, though. It's the split. I mean, we see the split in snaps, 44 for Brown, 24 for Akers, 5 for Henderson. And then the touches are split, 21 for Brown, 15 for Akers, 3 for Henderson. If we could just expect that exact split moving forward every single week, Brown would be a decent flex play week in and week out because this is a good offense and he's going to have touchdowns. But we can't. We know for a fact they want to get Akers slowly more and more involved this season. And we know that Henderson is working his way back from the hamstring injury. He's not going to be that limited in snaps moving forward. And so there's a real chance that no one in this backfield clears 35-40% of the snaps. Maybe on rare occasions, someone approaches 50% if they're going off, but you're never really going to be able to just trust. This week, it's this guy, unless we see consistently one breakout. And the only one I can see truly breaking out and saying every single week I'm getting 55% of the workload of the snaps. I can approach 60, 70% if I'm just like going off, is Akers. That is the only one who is capable of that. I know Brown was the lead back this week, but you know what? He had like 50-something rushing yards last week 1 and 2 touchdowns. So he did like the same thing he did last week 1, and then he had 4.5 touches per game for the rest of the season. Now I know Gurley was there, but it's not like Gurley was any good. And I know Brown looked good this week, but this is Malcolm Brown, right? They spent a lot of draft capital on Henderson and Akers. They're not just going to completely bench them. And they've already gone out and said, we really, really want to have a committee. We want to do what the 49ers did last season and say, is someone going off right now? All right, keep him in. Oh, it's a different running back than last week? Okay, well, I don't really care. We don't have a lead back. We're just going to use whoever's hot. I really don't think week in and week out Malcolm Brown is going to be the guy that's hot, especially as Henderson gets more involved, as they expand the role of Akers. So I get that everyone is going to be on him as like the top waiver ad. I'm not. I'm not going out and getting Malcolm Brown because I do not trust that he is going to be just the guy. We just saw this happen last year where he was probably the top waiver ad. Let's not make the same mistake again. Akers is the most talented running back. Honestly, then Henderson, then Malcolm Brown. And I think by the end of the season, that's going to be closer to what the split is. As for the Eagles, we see Boston Scott have 11 touches on 38 snaps to Corey Clement's 8 touches on 25 snaps. I talked this offseason about how Scott is a solid handcuff and a guy that's going to be valuable if Miles Sanders goes down, but that Sanders is going to be the lead back, the workhorse back. If he goes down, they're not bringing Boston Scott into that role. Boston Scott is going to split in a committee. Neither Scott nor Clement can be trusted fully while Sanders is out. Scott will be a fine flex play in higher scoring games. He'll be much better in full PPR leagues. And I think he's going to be better than he was this week because we see that Washington, while not a great defense, has probably a top 3 pass rush. And so given the amount of injuries on the Eagles offensive line, it is not shocking that they could do really nothing on the ground and that Wentz got sacked, like 8 times? I mean, it's not shocking the running backs didn't do great. So I think that looking at Boston Scott and saying, oh, he's just horrible, well, that's not the move, right? Boston Scott's still going to be fine. He's going to be useful. I think he'll score more points moving forward. But he's never going to be the featured back while Sanders is out. So Sanders is still, once he's healthy, just the guy in this offense. But I think in full PPR leagues, Boston Scott is, and this is assuming Sanders doesn't come back this week. If Sanders comes back this week, you're not touching Boston Scott or Corey Clement. But if Sanders is out again, then I think Boston Scott can be a decent option in full PPR leagues or no K1 and half PPR. And I don't think you should play Corey Clement unless you're in like an 18-team full PPR league, something like that. Next up, we've got the Broncos at the Steelers. Steelers are 6.5-point home favorites, and the total is only 43 points. I honestly don't want to give a super strong take on the Broncos backfield here before watching the Monday night game. We're going to learn a lot depending on what happens there. Do they give Melvin Gordon the majority? Is it closer to a 50-50 split? I honestly think that could be a possibility, but I don't know yet. And so I don't want to give a take on something that's going to happen. And you guys are going to know going into this game. If Gordon comes out and he's just dominating the snaps, well, yeah, maybe we can use him against the Steelers. But if it's closer to a 50-50 split, which is what some people think could happen, I don't think you can play either of them against the Steelers. The Steelers are one of the best defenses in the league. But again, we're just going to have to wait and see. And I'm going to have to wait and see. You guys will know what the split is. As for the Steelers, I think it's a similar story with I don't want to give like a for sure take. I do think that Connor is going to be the featured back, and I do think he's going to have a really nice game in week 1. And if that does happen, like you're starting him, obviously, if he comes out and he dominates the snaps. But again, we're going to have to wait and see on that one. Panthers at Bucks is next. The Bucks are 7.5-point home favorites, and the total set at 49 points. On the Panthers side, you're obviously starting McCaffrey. We don't even talk about that. On the Bucks side, Ronald Jones was the clear lead back, but we said that might happen. We said that Jones might start the year in this role, but Fournette by the end of the year is more than likely going to be the guy. It's just that he just joined the team, and there's no way they're going to throw him out there in week 1 and give him a ton of touches, right? So by the end of the season, I think Fournette will be the guy, but I guess it's a weekly video, and so I really think it's going to be slow. I think it's going to be like, I don't remember how many touches Fournette got, but it was a handful of touches. I think each week he's going to get 1-2 more touches. They're going to slowly give him more and more snaps, and that's eventually going to make, honestly, like neither of them viable unless you can predict a touchdown. For this week, I do think Ronald Jones will get enough work to be a viable like running back to flex play. The Panthers are quite a bad defense. The Bucs are probably going to win this game, probably going to score a lot of points. And so given that I still think he'll be the majority of the lead back, or he's going to have the majority of the touches, I think he's viable, and I don't think you can play Fournette just yet. Next up, we got Washington at the Cardinals. Washington looked just horrendous in week 1. I mean, just absolutely horrible. And that's why we warned about being cautious with Antonio Gibson. It is very difficult for running backs to perform well in fantasy on bottom tier offenses. And it's looking like Washington is going to be one of the worst in the league this season. And so McKissick, we see, leads the backfield with 31 snaps, then Barber with 29, and then Gibson with 18. But the touch split was quite different. Barber gained 29 yards on 17 carries while commanding 0 targets. McKissick led in snaps, but turned 3 carries and 5 targets into -1 total yards. And then Gibson gained 44 yards on 9 carries and 2 targets. The only usable back here is Gibson, and even him, I mean, he is just a low-end flex play until we see his workload increase, which I think will happen. I do believe they're going to increase the workload of Gibson. It's just how quickly is that going to happen? You know, is he going to turn into like 12 touches and then 15, and then all of a sudden he's getting 15 to 17 each week? Or is it more gradual? You know, over this first month, do we only see him getting 10 touches a week and then slowly to 12 and then capping out at 15? We can't know that. And so right now, if you have better options, I would play them. But if you have to, in a full PPR league, it's not the worst flex play for some upside. I would just prefer to keep him on the bench. As for the Cardinals, Drake looked fine on Sunday, but Edmonds is clearly going to have a role this season, even while Drake is healthy. Edmonds had 6 carries and 3 targets, and was also used in the red zone on his receiving touchdown, while also out targeting Drake 5-2. Drake is still a must start as of right now, especially in this matchup, but he is not a featured back. And Edmonds honestly isn't the worst flex play in the world. Again, the pass rush and that defensive line of Washington is very good. So don't be shocked if they don't perform well on a per touch basis. But I do expect the Cardinals to pretty easily win this game. And so if they do that, then they're going to be ahead and the volume will be higher for the running backs. So to recap that, I really do think Drake, you got to keep starting him. If he's not getting targets on a consistent basis, and if this split moves a little closer, we'll reevaluate. But for right now, I think you're starting Drake. And then Edmonds, not the worst flex play in the world, but you probably have someone better. And like I said before, one of the highest upside handcuffs along with Pollard and Alexander Mattison. Next, we have the Kansas City Chiefs at the LA Chargers. And the Kansas City Chiefs are 8.5-point road favorites. That is a very large road favorite, and the total set at 48.5. For Kansas City, Clyde, obviously a weekly must start. No one else in this backfield is getting enough volume to be viable. On the Chargers side, they did not look good on Sunday, and their path to keeping this one competitive is pretty slim. Honestly, I don't think this is going to be a close game. People are probably going to overreact. I haven't actually looked at different websites, looked on Twitter too much yet on how much people are reacting to the split in week 1. Sure, Joshua Kelly had 12 carries. He looked amazing. And like we said all offseason, we think Joshua Kelly is going to be the clear backup and that he is going to get goal line work and that he is going to take workload on the ground every single week. And that happened. They bring him in the goal line. They give him his 12 carries. I think he's going to be in that 10 to 12 carries each week. But Eckler still outsnapped him 50-18. And I'm still thinking that they're going to try and get him more work in the receiving game, and he's going to increase from 1 target. Now, this is part of the reason why we said Eckler could be good this season, but it's pretty risky, right? Because we think Tyrod Taylor can command this offense, but Tyrod looked very bad. I am very disappointed in how Tyrod looked, given all the talent he had surrounding him against a pretty mediocre defense. And so I'm not using Tyrod going forward. I do not trust him at all anymore, but that's why streaming quarterbacks is great, because we can reevaluate every single week. We can look at the best matchups and we can go from there. But if Tyrod looks this bad and he's not targeting Eckler, then that's concerning. And so we will reevaluate this next week if we look at the split again. But remember, he had 50 snaps to Kelly's 18. So it's not like this takeover is all of a sudden happening. Like, Eckler still had a ton of touches, and he's talented enough to produce if he keeps getting that sort of workload. So you're starting Austin Eckler in all formats, and Kelly, keep him on the bench and just, he's the high upside play if Eckler went down. Next up, we've got the Ravens taking on the Texans. The Ravens are currently 7-point road favorites, and the total is 52.5, a massive total, I believe the highest one on the week. And so there should be a lot of scoring on this one. On the Ravens side, Dobbins actually outsnapped Mark Ingram 23-21, while also playing 10 snaps at wide receiver. And that's included in the 23. So he didn't play 33 snaps. 23 total snaps, 10 of those came either in the slot or out wide. Ingram was only able to turn 21 snaps into 29 scoreless yards, while Dobbins only gained 22 yards himself, but did convert 2 touchdowns. This was the perfect game script for the running backs, so it is very concerning that Ingram played so poorly, and this is why we avoided him all offseason. I had him tanked in the rankings, and he was behind Dobbins in our rankings because Ingram is not going to be useful unless he scores. He's not going to have any sort of reception ceiling, and the touchdown ceiling is much lower than it was last season, given that Dobbins is there, and we just saw that play out in week 1. So I think you can, if you really need to, start Ingram in the flex and just pray for a touchdown, but ultimately, I'd prefer not to. And if there's someone in your league that's willing to trade for him, you don't like trading high on studs, I don't consider Ingram a stud. And so if there's someone out there that's like, ooh, time to buy low on Ingram, no, it is not, and you should give him to him. Also, pretty concerning, Lamar Jackson threw 0 passes to either Dobbins or Ingram. I think that'll change in games where they're not winning by what did they win by? 32? It was at least 30 points they won by. When it's a little bit more competitive, they are going to throw to running backs. But remember, I said Dobbins was the one that split out wide 10 times, not Ingram. So Dobbins is that one that has more receiving upside. On the Texans, David Johnson is just a weekly must start, and every week that he's healthy. Duke is obviously not someone you should start coming off an ankle injury, even if he plays. But, if he plays, if he doesn't play, you're not starting him anyways. Sunday night game was going to be New England at Seattle. The Seattle Seahawks are 4-point home favorites, and the game has a 45-point total on the New England side. The only one I'd consider is James White in a full PPR league, but even that isn't ideal, honestly. All of Sony Michel, Rex Burkhead, and James White saw exactly 19 snaps, which is not good for fantasy, so I'm just avoiding that situation entirely. On the Seattle side, Carson may have gone off, but it was really only the 2 touchdowns, right? I mean, he played 28 snaps to Carlos Hyde's 21, so not a big difference in the snaps. And Hyde actually had 1 more carry than Carson did. I would want to see more than 12 touches a week before calling him a must start, but I do think you should be playing him even in a brutal matchup against the Patriots because he's good. He's going to be involved in the receiving game. He's going to have some touchdown equity. I just don't think that you can really bench him unless you've got just this insanely good running back core. But, don't just look at the fantasy points. Realize they only had 12 touches. Finally, final game of the week is the Monday night matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the LA Raiders. The Saints are only 5.5-point road favorites, which I think will go up. And then the game has a 51.5-point total. On the Saints side, always start out with Kamara. Latavius did have 15 carries to Kamara's 12. But that was mostly just the Saints running the clock out at the end, not wanting a fumble because Latavius Murray is very good in the ball security category. But Murray is a very, very thin play. You're basically just praying he falls into the end zone. You probably don't need to go there, so I wouldn't play him. Kamara, obviously, just a weekly, just top 5, top 7 option, regardless of matchup. As for the Raiders, Jacobs predictably smashed in just the dream spot, and he had 6 targets while dominating the running back snaps and touches. If he keeps up this sort of workload, now this is a tough matchup, so maybe he doesn't get as many touches, But this sort of share of the offense, he is going to finish as a running back one, but like a top 7 or 8 running back for sure, and is at this moment a weekly must start. I do not care who they're playing. So that was an insanely long video, but I think it was a good breakdown of how every backfield is looking as of right now. It's entirely possible that you have multiple players that I listed as starts, so if you're unsure which one to pick, you can always check out my rankings at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.